Chapter 2. Charles Moore discovered an unusual rock on Hawaii's Kimono Beach in 2006. When Canadian geologist Patricia Corcona heard about it, she flew over to see it. The lump contained shells, coral, wood, and volcanic rock and sand, all fused together by great heat and plastic. She named it Plastia gulmati and determined that it had been created by bonfires built by campers in the trash-strewn beach. Kokorna inspected the beach's larger plastic trash and found it had traveled from Russia and Asia, riding the Gyres current. Colorful microplastic mixed with grains and beach sand. How did they get to the Hawaiian beach so far from the open sea? Oceanographer Curtis Esmer once described how the Gyres pollutant center moved around like a big animal without a leash. When it gets close to an island, the garbage patch barfs and you get a beach covered with this confetti of plastic. Henderson Island in the south of Pacific Ocean, for example, is remote and uninhabited, yet littered with 38 million pieces of plastic. Like a chunk of plastic gilmorta, today's beach sand holds history. Every little piece of plastic manufactured in the last 50 years that made it into the ocean is still out there somewhere because there is no effective mechanism for breaking it down, said the plastic researcher Anthony Andre. Sea glass and bits of ceramic and rust metals also mix with beach sand to tell an older story. People have always been searching for the best material to shape into the necessities and luxuries of everyday living. They learned to mold clay, hammer metal, and melt sand into glass. They've shaved thin sheets of animal horns to make translucent panels for lanterns. These materials are plastic in the sense that they can be easily shaped. The English word plastic comes from the Greek word plastikos, which means moldable. Trees can make a kind of plastic with the help of human creativity. More than 2,000 years ago, the Homs Mayans and people from other Mesoamerican civilizations cut the bark of rubber trees to release drips of a milky fluid. By mixing in the juice from marigold vines, they made rubber elastic and useful for making bouncy balls, stretch bands, glues, and flexible sandals. European explorers in the region in the 16th century were intrigued by this new material and learned how to plant, harvest, and use rubber. By 1830, people living in wet climates eagerly bought rubber-treated clothing and boots invented by the Scottish chemist Charles Mackintosh. The Mackintosh raincoat is named after him, but spelled differently. While rubber was waterproof, it was not weatherproof. In the winter, rubber cracked, and in the summer, it melted. Charles Goodyear, a self-taught American chemist, solved the problem, and in 1839, after years of tireless experimentation at home, and possibly with the help of an accident, when a lump of rubber mixed with the eggy smelling chemical sulfur slipped from his hands onto a hot stove, he discovered a transformed. It was dry and firm, yet still flexible. The vulcanized rubber, named after Vulcan, the Roman god of fire, now takes many forms, including tires, protective casings for electronics, wires, soccer balls, shoe soles, water hoses, and erasers. A workplace recipe for rubber did not end the search for new multi-purpose materials. The urge to solve problems as to get rich is strong. Moore pointed out natural minerals such as tortoiseshells and animal horns, once commonly used to make everyday items like combs, were scarce and expensive. Inventors raced to find ways to manufacture a new material to introduce expensive in to imitate expensive materials. In the 1860s, British chemist Alexander Perks proved that wood fibers called cellulose could help make more than paper by adding ingredients such as nitric acid. He created a moldable material for making low cost everyday items, including combs, buttons, and silverware handles. American manufacturer owner John Wesley Hyatt improved the formula in 1870 and called the new material celluloid. By adding camphor, a waxy chemical, he created a doughy substance that dried hard. He used celluloid to make smooth, white billiard balls that looked like expensive ivory and eyeglass dyed to imitate tortoiseshells. Celluloid was molded, cut, pressed, and polished to make brush handles, piano keys, eyeglasses, eyeglass frames, false teeth, and even photographic films. In the early 1900s, Belgian American chemist Leo Beckenel recreated a sticky, honey colored substance produced by Asian beetles. This natural resin coated the protected electrical wire, but it was so scarce. Like other inventors, Beekland turned to natural materials to make a synthetic version, but his raw material, petroleum, originated from ancient plants transformed by pressure and heat deep underground. Despite a laboratory fire, Beekland experimented with mixing sharp smelling petroleum gases and liquids derived from coal. Under pressure and heat, the result was a thick resin easily poured into molds before it dried hard and glossy. Becklands named his new product Beckentile, and it has been called the first modern plastic. Advertised as the material of 1,000 uses, it could be molded, drilled, bent, and pressured by machines to create objects of almost any shape. Customers could not get enough of the sleek, fashionable material. It was shaped into doorknobs, toothbrushes, steering wheels, radios, jewelry, pens, telephones, and even coffins. Chemists were soon inventing more petroleum based materials. The journey from naturally occurring materials to synthetic ones begins with pumps drawing crude oil from underground. The dark liquid contains many kinds of fuels that must be separated at refineries. Propane is used for furnace and gas barbecue grills. Gasoline is used for automobile engines. Jet fuel propels planes. About 4% of crude oil contains the materials, such as naphtha, that are needed to make plastic. They are heated and mixed with other chemicals to create plastics of various colors and degrees of flexibility. Ranging from rigid to rubbery, the material is extruded into long ribbons, sliced into pellets, and sent to factories. Softened by heat, the raw plastic can take countless forms. By the 1930s, factories puffed up plastic into light foams for home insulation or stretched it into silky threads for nylon stockings or toothbrush bristles. Once hand polished out of tortoiseshells, combs now poured out of plastic factories at a rate of 1,000 a day. New plastic could take brightly colored dyes or be clear to reveal food inside. Shapes contain Shape changing was the superpower of heroes in the 1940 comics called Plastic Man. Plastics were enlisted for critical jobs in World War II. They were used to make parachutes and parts for airplanes and guns. They coated antennas and radar cables and lined helmets. Factories manufactured 4 times as much plastic at the end of the war as they did before the war. After the war, factories owners did not want profits to slow. Plastic businesses shift from supplying soldiers in battle to supplying civilians at home. Beginning in the 1950s, plastic trickled and then flooded into everyday life, replacing such materials as glass and expensive metals and rubbers. Plastic took the shapes of countertops, clear plastic wrap for food, squeeze bottles, electric plugs, telephones, toothbrushes, and even contact lenses and clear adhesive tape. Children assembled plastic building blocks, sets, and played with dolls molded from plastic instead of the fragile porcelain. One toy was simply a lump of plastic putty that playful hands could press, pull, and twist into endless shapes. Factories in the 1960s produced stackable chairs molded from a single piece of plastic. Plastic even ventured to the moon on the nylon thread of the flag planted by Neil Armstrong. Later, they traveled into the human body with the first artificial heart. Plentiful and affordable plastic helped shape a new lifestyle. They help people of all incomes get more for their money. We were a nation of consumers now, a society increasingly dem- democratized by our shared ability to enjoy the conveniences and comfort of modern life, wrote author Susan Franklin. Among the modern conveniences and comforts were dishwashers and air conditionings. Plastic offered other conveniences. A 1955 article in Life magazine titled Throwaway Living, Disposable Items Cut Down Consumer Chores featured a photograph of a family tossing plates, cups, napkins, and more. The flying objects through the air would take about 40 hours to clean, said the caption, except that no housewife needed bother. They are all meant to be thrown away after use. By the 1960s, people were writing with disposable pens instead of refillable fountain pens, and drinking coffee from foam cups instead of ceramic ones that required washing. Yet humans have always found new forms for old materials. Objects made of metal were repaired or the material used again. Worn out clothing could be mended, redesigned, or shredded to make paper. But then it sometimes became cheaper to buy new plastic goods than repair old ones. The idea that you threw stuff out when it wore out is a 20th century idea, wrote Susan Stratis, author of Waste and Want, A Social History of Trash. Plastic trash started accumulating where trash always had, in waterways, from ancient Rome to some cities, even today. Foul smelling sewage has polluted drinking water with disease. Riverside factories have added industrial chemicals. Ohio Cuyahoga River was so polluted with chemicals that it caught fire in 1969, catching the attention of government leaders. The Federal the Clean Water Act added stricter rules in 1972 on industrial plants along waterways. But wind and rain swept much plastic into the waterways from small containers of trashes on beach, roadsides, and parks. Perhaps for a while, we weren't as bothered as we might have been. Charles Moore responded, because we still thought plastic material was inert and benign, an eyesore that couldn't do much harm. Now we know better.